I once thought there was nothing left that could shock me. After 30 years in the business world, after a marriage that ended in death, after raising my child alone since he was 12, I believed I was strong enough to endure anything. I was wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, Maddie's voice rang out high, clear, confident. Before the party begins, I'd like to introduce someone very special. I stood in the front row, holding a glass of champagne, still thinking about what I should politely say to the bride's mother later. Then Maddie turned around and pointed straight at me. "This," she said, stressing every word, "is the old dog my family had to tolerate when we agreed to this marriage." In that moment, I heard nothing. Not because the room was silent, but because every sound disappeared inside my head. I don't remember whether I was breathing. I only remember the icy chill running down my spine, as if someone had poured a bucket of freezing water straight onto my heart. Then the laughter started. Not one laugh. The entire bride's table. Laughter from people in expensive suits, silk dresses, sparkling jewelry. Laughter from people who believed money gave them the right to humiliate others. I stood there. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't move. Because when humiliation comes too suddenly, your body doesn't know how to react. I looked at my son Ryan. He stood beside Maddie. His hand rested on her waist. His face had gone pale. But he said nothing. Not a single "don't say that." Not one step forward. And in that moment, I understood. This was not a slip of the tongue. It was planned. And Ryan knew beforehand. I paid for this wedding. Every single dollar. The hotel, the imported Dutch flowers, the jazz band, even the champagne Maddie was holding. But tonight, I was not the groom's mother. I was just the old dog. A man suddenly stood up. "Wait," his voice trembled. Are you Evelyn Cross?" The entire hall seemed to stop breathing. I turned and looked straight at him. "Yes," I said, "that's me." He went pale. Charles Hale, Maddie's father. The man who had been laughing the loudest moments earlier. "Evelyn Cross, the one just appointed interim chair of Hale Capital by the board?" he asked, almost whispering. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at him, then around the room, at the faces that had mocked me now frozen like wax statues. Finally, I nodded. Yes. No one spoke. Maddie stood there, her smile cracked like a broken mask. Ryan turned toward me, panic in his eyes for the first time that night. I took one slow step forward. "Monday," I said calmly. So calmly I surprised myself. 9 a.m. Top floor boardroom. I turned to Maddie. "Congratulations on your wedding," I said. "I believe we'll be seeing each other a lot." Then I set my champagne glass down. My hand didn't shake. I didn't look back. As I walked out of that glittering hall, I felt no shame. Only one thought remained. If they believed I was a dog, then on Monday, they would learn what it feels like to be bitten by that very dog with law, with power, and with truth. 2 hours before I was called an old dog in front of hundreds of people, I was standing in the dressing room behind the church, leaning forward to straighten my son's tie. Ryan stood in front of the mirror, tall, handsome, wearing a custom-made tuxedo. He looked uncannily like his father, the same broad shoulders, the same straight nose, the same habit of clenching his hands whenever he felt tense. "Are you nervous?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "A little," Ryan smiled, but he didn't meet my eyes. I didn't expect everything to be this big. I knew big didn't mean love. It meant the wedding. A wedding I paid for down to every detail, yet no one ever asked how I felt about it. I adjusted his tie, smoothed his lapel, and brushed away an invisible speck of lint from his shoulder, a habit I'd had for more than 30 years. "My son," I said softly, "if your father were still alive, he would be so proud of you." Ryan swallowed. "I know. Thank you, Mom." Those 2 words, "thank you, Mom," were polite, but they carried no warmth. I stepped back and looked at my son in the mirror. A 32-year-old man with degrees, a beautiful bride-to-be, and a future that looked solid to anyone on the outside. Only I knew how many empty spaces behind that image I had quietly filled with money and silence. 30 years ago, when Ryan was 12, his father died of cancer in just 6 months. One morning, I took my husband to the hospital. 6 months later, I walked behind his coffin to the cemetery. I didn't have time to collapse. Ryan needed food. Ryan needed school. Ryan needed someone who wouldn't cry in front of him. I went back to work 3 weeks after the funeral. I worked during the day and studied at night. I built my career on sleepless nights, contracts signed through tears, and cold dinners eaten alone. Not because of ambition, but because I refused to let my son grow up lacking anything. When Ryan went to college, I paid the tuition. When he wanted to change majors, I didn't stop him. When he went to graduate school, I paid again. I never once said, "Look at everything I've done for you." Because to me, love was never a list of expenses. The wedding conversation happened about a year earlier. Ryan sat at my kitchen table, turning his coffee cup in his hands, without drinking a familiar sign. Whenever he needed money, he avoided looking me in the eye. "Mom," he said, "Maddie's family, they have certain expectations." I didn't ask right away. I waited. In business, I learned that silence makes people talk more. Maddie's cousin had her wedding at a 5-star hotel. Over 300 guests. Very grand. "And?" I asked. "And Maddie has dreamed of a wedding like that since she was a little girl." I set the kettle down and looked at him. "How do you and Maddie plan to pay for it?" Ryan was silent. I understood. "You want me to help," he said quickly, as if afraid I'd change my mind if he waited 1 second too long. "How much?" I asked. "If everything is done properly." "About $250,000. Maybe more. $250,000. The number hung in the kitchen, like a heavy object in the air. "Ryan," I said slowly, "that's an amount many people don't earn in 5 years." "I know," he said. "But you can afford it. Your job is good. And after Dad passed away." He stopped. The way my son unconsciously used his father's death as a financial justification hurt so deeply that I had to turn away. "I love Maddie," he said, his voice quieter. "I want to be worthy of her." That word pierced my heart. Worthy. I had raised my son his entire life to believe his value was not measured by money, and now he sat across from me, saying he needed money just to be worthy. That night, I sat alone in my study, facing the photo of my husband on my desk. He was smiling gently, his eyes always looking at me as if I were the strongest person in the world. "If you were here," I whispered, "what would you do?" I knew the answer. He would say, "Help our son." The next morning, I called Ryan. "I'll take care of it," I said. "I'll pay for everything." On the other end of the line, Ryan exhaled in relief, as if he'd just been pulled from drowning. "I'll pay you back," he said, "once my career is stable." I smiled. I didn't believe him, but I said nothing. And that was the moment I failed to realize I was teaching my son the wrong lesson, that his mother would always absorb the consequences, that my money came with no conditions, that my silence meant acceptance. 2 hours before the wedding, I still believed I was a good mother. 2 hours later, I stood in the middle of a grand hall, being called an old dog. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself, had I loved my son in a way that taught him to forget how to respect me? After leaving the wedding hall, I didn't go straight to the restroom. I walked slowly down the long red-carpeted corridor where wedding photos were projected onto large screens. Ryan and Maddie smiled brightly in every frame. They looked like a perfect couple, young, successful, blessed by the world. None of those images knew that just minutes earlier, the groom's mother had been called an old dog in front of hundreds of people. I stopped in front of a large mirror at the end of the hallway. The woman staring back at me looked strangely calm. No tears, no shaking. My lipstick was intact, my dress still perfectly pressed. Only something inside me had changed. And suddenly, a truth tightened around my heart. Tonight wasn't the first time I had been insulted. It was the first time I stopped making excuses for them. For years, I had explained things away for my son. Ryan is busy. Hez under pressure. He didn't mean it. I told myself that being a mother meant understanding. But standing there in front of that mirror, I understood something very simple. Understanding does not mean acceptance. I went into the VIP restroom, locked the door, placed both hands on the sink, looked straight at myself. 30 years ago, when my husband died, I made myself a promise. I would not let life make me smaller. And yet, somewhere along the way, I had allowed my own family to do exactly that. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Miles, my assistant. Evelyn, the board has reconfirmed, Monday, 9 a.m. Conference room, 46th floor. All documents are ready. I stared at those words for a long time. Monday. Less than 48 hours away. I took a deep breath. Then I smiled. Not a polite smile, but the smile of someone who has decided not to step back anymore. When I returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed. No loud laughter, no openly condescending stares. People looked at me more cautiously now. Charles Hale stood near the bar, speaking with several men in dark suits. When he saw me, he froze, then hurried over. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "may we speak privately?" "Tonight isn't the time," I replied, gentle but firm. "Monday?" He nodded, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I looked at Maddie. She stood beside Ryan, lips pressed tight, eyes unsettled. The confidence she had earlier was gone. For the first time, I saw fear in her face. Ryan avoided my gaze, and in that moment, I understood very clearly. My son knew I was no longer silent. I didn't stay long. I greeted a few old acquaintances, shook hands politely, and left. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. The car pulled away from the hotel, the lights fading behind us. I sat upright, hands resting neatly on my lap. No tears. Just one very clear thought. From now on, every time I give, it will be a choice, not an obligation. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the darkness of the living room, where there had once been so many warm dinners when Ryan was little. I remembered him running through the door, dropping his backpack, shouting, "Mom, I'm hungry!" Back then, I was always there. But tonight, I no longer felt the need to prove anything. I turned on the desk lamp, opened my laptop, and logged into the document system I had been preparing for years. Contracts, shares, meeting minutes, signatures. Everything was there. Not for revenge, but to restore order. Before going to bed, I checked my phone and saw a message from Ryan. "Mom, Maddie went a bit too far tonight. I'm sorry. Can we talk later?" I read the message 3 times. Then I put the phone down. I didn't reply. Because some conversations can't happen through text messages, and some apologies arrive too late to keep their meaning. I went to bed and turned off the light. For the first time in many years, I slept deeply. No dreams, no sudden waking, just a strange calm. The calm of someone who has finally understood. Silence is not always noble. Sometimes, it is simply self-erasure. If you're listening to this and feel your heart grow heavy, if you've sacrificed so much for your family only to be treated with disrespect, stay with me. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened on Monday morning when I walked into a room where everyone believed they still had control. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And if you've ever felt overlooked within your own family, leave a comment. I read every single one. You are not alone. On Monday morning, I woke up at 5:30, not because of an alarm, but because my body had learned to rise before the world demanded anything from me. Outside the window, the city was still wrapped in mist. I made coffee and sat alone in the kitchen, watching the wall clock tick in steady rhythm. There was no nervousness, no trembling hands, no surge of anger. Only a strange calm, the kind that comes before a storm, when everything has already been decided. I chose a dark gray suit, clean lines, tailored but simple. No elaborate jewelry, no need to impress. The people who needed to know who I was already did. When the car stopped in front of the Hale Capitol building, I looked up at the glass facade, reflecting the morning sky. 30 years ago, I had stood in front of a building just like this one, shaking because I was the only woman in the boardroom. Today, I walked in as someone who was no longer asking for permission. The elevator carried me to the 46th floor. The doors opened. The boardroom was already occupied. Charles Hale sat at the head of the table, his fingers interlaced. His eyes flicked toward me, unable to hide the tension. Beside him were several board members' familiar faces, the same people who had quietly approved a decision Charles hadn't bothered to notice. "Good morning," I said calmly. I didn't wait to be invited. I pulled out a chair and sat in the middle of the table, the place where authority naturally settles. Charles cleared his throat. "Evelyn, before we begin, I think there may be a few misunderstandings we should clear up." "I agree," I replied, opening my briefcase. I placed the documents on the table one stack at a time, slowly, deliberately. "Last week," I said, "the board voted to appoint me interim chair of Hale Capital. The decision took effect at 8 a.m. this morning." No one spoke. I continued. "I currently hold 51% of the voting power through direct shares and proxy agreements." Which means I paused. Just long enough, all strategic decisions from today onward come through me. Charles stiffened in his chair. "This is unexpected," he said. "This company is my family's legacy." "I know," I nodded. "And that's exactly why I've spent the last 15 years watching it be run on outdated habits, favoritism, and fear of change." No one argued, because the numbers in the documents in front of them did not lie. "But I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to restore order." I looked directly at Charles. "First," I said, "I want to address an incident that occurred on Saturday night." He swallowed. "Your daughter," I continued, "called me an old dog in front of hundreds of guests at a wedding I paid for in full." The air in the room went rigid. "I will not accept that," I said evenly. "Not as a mother, and certainly not as a leader." Charles lowered his head. "I'll speak to Maddie." "No," I shook my head. "You won't. She will. With me. Today." I didn't pause. "Second," I said, turning the page, "Hale Capital's current benefits policy is unacceptable. Employees work 10 to 12 hours a day, yet receive only minimal healthcare coverage and retirement support." A few board members nodded quietly. "Starting next quarter," I said, "we will upgrade the entire benefits package. Costs will rise. Short-term profits will dip, but long-term stability will increase." Charles opened his mouth as if to object, then closed it. "Third," I said, "all management positions held by family members will be re-evaluated based on actual performance." This time Charles couldn't hide his alarm. "Evelyn," he said, "this is happening too fast." "I didn't ask whether it feels fast to you," I replied. "I asked whether you're ready to actually do the work." The room fell silent. The meeting ended in less than an hour. There was no vote, no debate. Only the truth laid out on the table, and no one brave enough to sweep it away. As people filed out, Charles lingered behind. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I didn't realize things had gone this far." "I know," I replied, "because you were used to not needing to realize." I stood, gathering my documents. "But from today," I said, "everything changes." When I walked out of the boardroom, I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. Light because, for the first time, I no longer questioned whether I was asking for too much. Light because I understood that standing up for my own worth did not make me a bad person. Back in my office, I received a message from Ryan. "Mom, what's happening at the company? Does it have anything to do with Saturday night?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put my phone down. Some questions are only truly understood when the price is paid. If this story has touched your heart, please remember you are not alone. Share what you're feeling. And tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city or country. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Voices of Auntie so you don't miss the next real-life family revenge stories where every tear carries a lesson about trust, betrayal, and awakening. Monday afternoon passed faster than I expected. Not because the work was easy, but because once people understand who's truly steering the ship, things begin to fall into place on their own. Right after the morning meeting, Miles stepped into my office carrying a thick folder. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "the news is spreading. Employees on the 3 lower floors are talking. They're saying it's the first time someone has stood up for them." I nodded, not surprised. The people who've been ignored the longest are always the first to recognize real change. Less than an hour later, my desk phone started ringing. The first call came from the Hale family's private attorney. His voice was cautious, every word chosen as if he were walking on thin ice. "Miss Cross," he said, "the Hale family would like to better understand your direction for the company." My direction was clearly presented in the meeting, I replied. "If you need a copy of the minutes, my assistant will send it." The second call came from a board member not to object, but to ask whether their position was still secure. That question said everything. The third call, I didn't even need to answer to know who it was from. "Maddie." I watched her name flash on my phone again and again. First missed call, second, third. I didn't pick up. Not out of anger, but because I was no longer reacting to other people's emotions. At 4 o'clock, a message came through. Mrs. Evelyn, this is Maddie. I know I said something unforgivable on Saturday night. I'd like to meet and talk. No apology. Just a request to meet. I set the phone down. That evening, I went home early. The house was unusually quiet. I made a simple dinner, hot soup, toasted bread. No one asked me about the meeting. No one waited to eat with me. Just as I finished cleaning up, the doorbell rang. I checked the clock. 7:15 p.m. Through the door camera, I saw Charles Hale standing outside. No suit, no tie. Just a tired, middle-aged man. I opened the door. Evelyn, he said hoarsely. I'm sorry to come unannounced. I wasn't expecting you, I replied, stepping aside. But come in. We sat across from each other in the living room. No wine, no tea, just silence. The company is unsettled, he said finally. My family is too. I imagine so, I replied. Maddie has been crying all day, he continued. She doesn't understand what's happening. On Saturday night, I said slowly. She understood exactly what she was doing. He lowered his head. I'm not making excuses, Charles said. But she grew up in an environment where people judge others very quickly. Quick judgment isn't the issue, I said. Disrespect is, he sighed. Evelyn, what do you want from my family? I looked at him. Really looked. A man accustomed to things running on inertia, to being respected without explanation, now facing something he had never been forced to learn before. Consequences. I want respect, I said. Not fear, not flattery. Just respect. And if Maddie apologizes? I don't need an apology to smooth things over, I replied. I need a real one that understands what her words revealed about her. Charles was silent for a long time. I'll tell her to call you, he said at last. This time, the right way. I stood up. You don't need to tell her, I said. She'll call when she's ready to take responsibility. He looked at me, his eyes no longer holding the upper hand. Evelyn, he said quietly, I misjudged you. No, I replied. You never judged me at all. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a few seconds, not because I was tired, but because I had just crossed a boundary I had never crossed in my entire life. My phone vibrated again. A message from Ryan. Mom, what's happening at the company is really scaring Maddie and her family. Could you be a little gentler? I read the message twice. Then a third time, and a heavy realization settled in my chest. Even now, my son was more concerned about his wife's family's feelings than his mother's pain. I didn't reply, because if I answered right then, I would fall back into my old role explaining, soothing, yielding. And I had promised myself I wouldn't do that anymore. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the lights turned low. I thought about Maddie, a young woman raised with money, who had never been told no. I thought about Ryan, my son, who had learned to avoid conflict by letting others bear the consequences. And I thought about myself, a woman who had spent her entire life making things smooth for everyone else until she forgot that such smoothness was often built on one-sided sacrifice. Near 10 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a call. I looked at the name on the screen. Maddie. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring a few times. Then I pressed accept. Mrs. Evelyn. Her voice trembled. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. Not in relief, but because I knew this apology was only the beginning. The harder part was still ahead. If this story has touched your heart, please remember you are not alone. Share what you're feeling. And tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city or country. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie, so you don't miss the next real-life family revenge stories where every tear carries a lesson about trust, betrayal, and awakening. I'm sorry. Those 3 words trembled through the phone line, thin and fragile like a single thread. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch on the other end for a few more seconds, not to punish her, but to see whether Maddie had the courage to stand still with what she had said. "Mrs. Evelyn," she continued, her voice breaking, "I know what I said that night. Can't be taken back. I know I hurt you. Why?" I asked. A short question, no threat, no sarcasm. On the other end, Maddie took a deep breath. I could hear it clearly, the breath of a young woman trying to gather a confidence that had always come easily to her, until now. "Because I thought you couldn't do anything," she said softly. "The truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it only needs to be spoken at the right moment." "That night," Maddie went on, "I thought you were just a wealthy mother-in-law who liked to control her son. I thought, at worst, you'd be angry, then go quiet like before." "Like before?" I repeated. I heard Ryan talk," she rushed to explain. "He said you don't like being challenged, that you use money to keep things your way." I closed my eyes, not in shock, but because a missing piece had just snapped into the most painful place. "Did you ever ask me?" I said. "Or did you just believe what you were told?" Silence. "I believed it," she whispered, "because it was convenient." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Believing what's convenient is always easier than observing for yourself," I said. "But it's also the fastest way to hurt someone." "I'm sorry," Maddie said again, this time clearer. "Not because of the company, not because of my parents, but because I insulted you, as a human being." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Inside me was a strange feeling, not victory, not forgiveness, but clarity. "Your apology," I said slowly, "only matters if you understand what led you there." "I do," Maddie replied. "I grew up in a family where people are always ranked. Whoever has more is right, whoever stays quiet is weak, and you applied that rule to me," I said. "Yes," she admitted. "I thought you would endure it, because you're a mother." I smiled sadly. "You're wrong, Maddie," I said. "I endured not because I was weak. I endured because I believed in family. But trust, when it isn't respected, becomes something dangerous." She began to cry. I heard the sobs being held back. "Do you hate me?" Maddie asked. I thought for a long time. "No," I said, "I don't hate you, but I no longer minimize what you did." "What do I need to do for you to trust me?" she asked. "You don't need my trust," I replied. "You need to learn accountability, even when it costs you what you're used to having." The call ended in silence. No promises. No comfort. I set the phone down and sat still for a long time. About 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I knew immediately who it was. Ryan stood at the door, his face tense, his eyes a mix of worry and irritation, the same look he used to have as a boy when he was sent to the principal's office. "Mom," he said, the moment I opened the door, "Maddie just called me. She's panicking." "Good," I replied, turning away. "Come in." Ryan followed me into the living room. "What did you say to her?" he asked, his voice sharper than usual. "I asked for the truth," I said, "and she gave it." Ryan clenched his fists. "You didn't have to make it this intense," he said. "Maddie's family is under huge pressure." "The company, their reputation, Ryan," I interrupted. "Who are you talking about right now?" "Everyone," he answered quickly. "I'm trying to keep things stable." "No," I said, "you're trying to protect appearances." Ryan froze. "You knew what Maddie was going to say that night, didn't you?" I asked. He didn't answer. "What did you tell her about me?" I continued. "Mom," Ryan exhaled. "I just said you interfere sometimes, that you worry too much. I didn't think she would." "You didn't think," I said gently. "And that's the problem." Ryan looked at me, his eyes reddening. "I just want a normal life," he said. "I don't want to be compared to you all the time." I stepped closer and looked directly into my son's eyes. "Ryan," I said, "I never asked you to be like me. I only asked you to respect me." "I do respect you," he said, his voice weakening. "No," I shook my head. "You respect my money, not me." The words fell between us like something heavy. Ryan sat down, his head bowed. "I don't know what to do anymore," he whispered. "For the first time," I said, "I'm not fixing things for you. And that's exactly what you need to learn." I turned toward the window. The city lights were coming on, one by one, like separate lives lighting up their own stories. "I love Maddie," Ryan said. I don't want to lose her. Then be honest, I replied. With her. With yourself. Ryan looked up. Are you still on my side? He asked. I turned back to him. My son, I said slowly, I will always be on your side, but I will no longer stand in front of you to break every fall. Ryan said nothing. When he left, I didn't stop him. I knew things would no longer be smooth from here on. But I also knew that, for the first time in many years, things were finally right. If this story touched your heart, please remember you are not alone. Share how you're feeling. And tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city or country. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tay so you don't miss the next real-life family revenge stories where every tear carries a lesson about trust, betrayal, and awakening. That night, after Ryan left, I didn't sleep. I lay still in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the city breathe steadily beyond the window. In past years, when my mind wouldn't settle, I would turn on the light, open my laptop, and work until exhaustion took over. But tonight, I didn't want to escape into work anymore, because for the first time, the problem wasn't in the numbers. It was in the son I had raised. I replayed every small detail of my conversation with Maddie, the way she hesitated before saying Ryan's name, the way she said, I heard Ryan say, like an unwilling confession, and in that moment, I understood. The insult on Saturday night wasn't the cause, it was only the result. The result of months, perhaps years, of my son painting a distorted version of me in other people's eyes. The next morning, just as I set my coffee down on my desk, Miles knocked. Evelyn, he said carefully, there's something I think you should know. I looked up. What is it? The finance department just sent a preliminary report. There are some expenses directly connected to Ryan. I said nothing. Miles placed the folder on my desk. Reimbursements, travel expenses, and several short-term loans in his name, backed by the company's credibility. I flipped through the pages. Ryan's name appeared more often than I expected. Not once. Not by mistake. Since when? I asked. About 6 months ago, Miles replied. Before the wedding. I closed the folder. In my mind, the pieces slid into place. The avoidance of eye contact, the vague answers, the tension whenever money came up, the obsession with being worthy of Maddie's family. I took a deep breath. Call Ryan up here, I said. Now. Ryan arrived in less than 20 minutes. He walked into my office with a familiar posture, trying to look calm, but his shoulders were stiff, his jaw clenched. You called me, Mom? He asked. Sit down, I said, placing the folder in front of him. And tell me about this. Ryan looked at the papers, his face drained of color. I was going to tell you, he stammered. When? I asked. Soon. When is soon? I repeated. My voice didn't rise, but it turned cold. Ryan fell silent. I opened the folder and pointed to one line. This loan, I said. It's in your name, but backed by my reputation. Do you remember me agreeing to that? Ryan lowered his head. I didn't ask, he said quietly. I thought you'd understand. That sentence pierced my chest. You thought I'd understand, I repeated. You thought I'd keep absorbing the consequences, didn't you? Ryan looked up, his eyes red. I didn't mean to deceive you, he said. I was just trapped. Trapped in what? I asked. Living within your means? Or protecting your image in front of your wife's family? Ryan said nothing. What did you tell Maddie about me? I asked. Ryan closed his eyes. I said, you like to control things, he admitted. I said, you use money to interfere in my life. I nodded slowly. And you said that, I continued, while using my money, my reputation, and my position to cover up your own financial mistakes. Ryan began to cry. I was ashamed, he said. I didn't want Maddie to think I was weak. I didn't want her family to look down on me. So you let them look down on me, I said. Not a question. Ryan buried his face in his hands. In that moment, I felt a strange kind of pain, not sharp, not explosive, but heavy, like stone. The pain of realizing that love cannot fix everything. Ryan, I said slowly, there's something you need to understand. He looked up, eyes swollen. I'm not angry because you failed, I said. Everyone stumbles. I'm angry because you chose to make me the villain to protect your ego. Ryan trembled. I'm sorry, he said. I'll fix it. I'll explain everything to Maddie. No. I shook my head. You won't explain it away. I stood and walked to the window. From now on, I said, every expense and every financial decision involving you will be monitored. No more guarantees, no more clearing the path. You will live on exactly what you earn. Ryan jumped to his feet. Mom, if you do that, you'll learn. I cut in. You'll learn responsibility. And if Maddie leaves because of the truth, then that is the price of not being honest from the start. Ryan stared at me, terrified. You're punishing me, he said. I turned back to him. No, I replied. I'm stopping my protection. The difference was enormous. Ryan left my office with heavy steps. I knew this conversation wasn't the end. Once exposed, the truth would trigger more tremors. And sure enough, less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Maddie. I looked at her name on the screen, then answered. Mrs. Evelyn, Maddie said, her voice unsteady. Ryan just told me about the loans. About using your reputation. I closed my eyes. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. If this story has touched your heart, please remember, you are not alone. Share how you're feeling, and tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city or country. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie so you don't miss the next real-life family revenge stories where every tear carries a lesson about trust, betrayal, and awakening. That evening, after my conversation with Maddie, I sat in my office for a long time without turning on the overhead lights. Only my desk lamp glowed against the dark wood surface that had been with me through 20 years of work. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I wasn't angry. Instead, I felt something even more frightening. Absolute clarity. When you look at something long enough, deeply enough, there comes a moment when every excuse falls away. No more he's still young. No more he's under pressure. No more family must be forgiving. Only one question remains. Am I going to keep protecting this wrong behavior? And for the first time in my life, my answer was no. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Miles was already waiting with my schedule in hand, but one look into my eyes and he understood today wouldn't be an ordinary day. Evelyn, he said quietly, Ryan requested the day off. He said, he needs time. Good, I replied. He's going to need a lot of time. Miles nodded, not asking more. I called Donna Keller, my attorney, and asked her to meet me that morning. Not to threaten anyone, not to punish, but to draw a clear legal boundary. When Donna arrived, I handed her the entire file connected to Ryan, the loans, the unofficial guarantees, the signatures I had never authorized. Donna read carefully, then looked up at me. Evelyn, she said slowly, legally, you have two paths. One is to continue stepping in and handling every consequence for your son. The other is to remove yourself completely from any responsibility connected to his decisions. I choose the second, I said without hesitation. Donna studied me for a long moment. That will be hard, she said. Not only for Ryan, but for the family image. I've spent my entire life protecting the family image, I replied. And that's exactly why things went this far. Donna nodded. Then we'll do this properly, she said. Clear, transparent. No gray areas. When Donna left, it felt like I'd set down a heavy backpack I'd carried for decades. At noon, I received a message from Ryan. Mom, I talked to Maddie. She went to her parents' house. I stared at the words, then put my phone down. No questions. No apologies. No reassurance. Because in certain moments, silence is the most honest answer. That afternoon, Charles Hale called me. His voice sounded rough. Evelyn, he said, my family is falling apart. Maddie won't speak to anyone. And Ryan, he doesn't seem okay. I know, I replied. How far are you going to take this? He asked. This is family. Precisely because it's family, I said. It has to stop here. Charles exhaled. Ryan has lived under enormous pressure stepping into our family, he said. Maybe we share some responsibility too. I was quiet for a moment. Charles, I said at last. An adult's responsibility isn't to cover up their children's wrong choices. It's to not teach them that those wrong choices will always be rescued. He didn't respond. I knew he understood. He just understood too late. That evening, Ryan came to my house, unannounced. I opened the door and looked at my son, no suit, none of his usual confidence. Just a young man with tired, bewildered eyes. "Mom," he said, "I don't know where to go anymore." I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "But we need to talk." We sat across from each other in the living room. No tea, no dessert, none of the things that used to make every conversation easier. "You're pushing me away," Ryan said, voice trembling. "You're leaving me to figure this out alone when I need you the most." "I'm not pushing you away," I said. "I'm stopping myself from standing between you and the consequences of your choices." Ryan lowered his head. "You've never let me fall," he said. "And that was my mistake," I replied. Ryan looked up, stunned. "You never learned how to stand," I continued, "because I caught you before you hit the ground. What do you want me to do now?" he asked. "Be honest," I said, "with Maddie, with her family, and with yourself." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "If I'm completely honest, I'll lose everything." "No," I said, "you'll lose the things built on lies." That difference was something my son had never understood. When Ryan left that night, I didn't know what would happen to his marriage. I didn't know whether Maddie would return. I didn't know how the Hale family would react once everything was no longer sitting comfortably in the safe zone. But I knew one thing with certainty. I would not return to being the rescuer, not because I didn't love my son, but because I loved him enough not to enable his self-destruction. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams. And the next morning when I woke up, I felt a relief I had never known before, the relief of someone who finally understands. Setting boundaries is not betraying your family. It is the only way a family has any chance of truly surviving. If this story has touched your heart, please remember you are not alone. Share what you're feeling, and tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city or country. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie so you don't miss the next real-life family revenge stories where every tear carries a lesson about trust, betrayal, and awakening. 3 days after Ryan left my house, I received an email from the bank. Just the subject line alone was enough to make my heart sink. Signature verification request, personal guarantee file. I opened the email very slowly. Not because I was afraid, but because I had sensed this was coming. Attached was a copy of a short-term loan agreement in Ryan's name, but the guarantor section carried my name. The signature looked very much like mine, close enough to fool a rushed bank employee, but not close enough to fool me. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. So what I suspected was worse than I thought. I called Donna immediately. "Donna," I said, my voice low, "we need to meet with Ryan again. Today." Less than an hour later, Ryan sat across from me and Donna in a small company meeting room. He no longer looked defensive or irritated, only exhausted, hollowed out. "Ryan," Donna said, sliding the file toward him, "do you recognize this signature?" Ryan stared down at the paper. For 1 second. Then his shoulders collapsed. "Yes," he whispered. "It was me. I didn't speak." Donna continued, calm and cold, the voice of someone trained to handle painful truth. "You signed your mother's name on at least 3 loan files over 6 months. The total amount isn't large compared to Miss Cross assets, but it is enough to constitute fraud and forgery." Ryan shut his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "I just needed money to keep things moving. I thought, once the wedding was done, everything would settle." "Settle how?" I asked. Ryan didn't answer. Donna looked at me. "Evelyn," she said, "legally you can choose. Press charges to protect yourself, or handle it quietly to avoid criminal consequences for Ryan." I looked at my son, the child who once held my hand walking through the cemetery when his father died, the boy who sobbed for breaking his father's old watch, and the man sitting in front of me now, one wrong decision stacked onto another. "Ryan," I said slowly, "do you know what hurts me the most?" He shook his head. "Not the money," I said. "Not the legal mess. It's that you didn't tell me the truth even once until there was nowhere left to run." Ryan broke down. "I was ashamed," he said. "I was afraid if I told you, you'd be disappointed." I am disappointed, I replied. Not because you failed, but because you chose deception. Donna stepped in. If we handle this internally, she said, Ryan will need to sign a repayment agreement, submit to financial monitoring, and be barred from signing any transactions for an extended period. I agree, I said immediately. Ryan looked up, eyes red. Mom, you're still helping me? I stared at him. No, I said. I'm not helping you escape consequences. I'm only ensuring those consequences don't destroy your future if you're willing to learn from them. Ryan lowered his head. And Maddie? He asked, his voice trembling. I exhaled. You built that relationship on concealment, I said. You can't demand she stays when the truth comes out. As if summoned by her name, Ryan's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, then at me. It's Maddie, he said. Don't put it on speaker, I replied. This is a conversation you have to face yourself. Ryan stood and stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him. Donna and I waited. 5 minutes, 10. When Ryan returned, his face was paper white. Maddie knows everything, he said. She found the paperwork at her parents' house. I nodded. What did she say? I asked. She said, she doesn't know who she married. Those words hit the room like a dry knock on wood. That afternoon, Maddie came to see me. No makeup, no beautiful dress, just a young woman with swollen eyes and a voice scraped raw from crying. Mrs. Evelyn, she said, I need the truth. All of it. So I told her, no more, no less. When I finished, Maddie sat in silence for a long time. I called you a dog, she whispered, her voice cracking, when I didn't even know what you were carrying for your son. I didn't respond. I'm sorry, Maddie said, but this apology isn't enough to save this marriage. I looked at her. Maddie, I said, some marriages end not because there isn't love, but because there isn't truth. She nodded. I need time, she said. And maybe I need to leave Ryan. You have every right, I replied. After Maddie walked out, I sat alone for a long time. I didn't know what Ryan's life would look like from here. I didn't know how the Hale family would see me after all this. I didn't even know whether I could ever rebuild the mother-son relationship the way it used to be. But I knew one thing. Truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation any relationship can stand on for long. And this time, I chose truth. If this story has touched your heart, please remember you are not alone. Share what you're feeling. And tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city or country. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tay so you don't miss the next real-life family revenge stories where every tear carries a lesson about trust, betrayal, and awakening. A week after my last meeting with Maddie, my home returned to its quiet as if no storm had ever passed through. No more unexpected doorbells, no more frantic messages, no more midnight calls carrying other people's panic. Only me and the truth. Ryan moved out of the apartment I had once helped him rent. He relocated to a smaller place, farther from the center, one that matched his actual finances. No complaints, no begging, no blame. Only the heavy silence of someone learning, for the first time, to live with consequences. I didn't ask how he was doing. Didn't ask if he had enough money. Didn't ask if Maddie called again. Because if I asked, I would slide back into my old role, the mother who fixes everything. And I had left that role behind. At the company, things unfolded exactly as I predicted. Those who had survived on family connections began to reveal their emptiness. Some resigned on their own. Others were forced out. No noise, no scandal, just a natural reordering. Charles Hale met me one last time on a rainy afternoon. He looked much older. Evelyn, he said quietly. Maddie decided to live separately for a while. She said, she needs to learn how to live without depending on anyone. I nodded. That's the right decision, I said. He looked at me, regret and respect tangled together. I thought you were taking revenge, he admitted, but now I understand. You were cleaning house. I'm not taking revenge, I replied. I'm just not looking away anymore. He lowered his head. My family has never been used to being told no, he said. Maybe that's why we raised our children worse than we thought. I didn't argue, because that truth only matters when a person discovers it themselves. Ryan called me for the first time in almost 10 days. No request for money, no request for help, just a call. "Mom," he said, tired but steady, "I started working weekends. I need to repay what I caused." "Good," I said. "Mom, are you still angry with me?" he asked. I thought for a long time. "No," I said. "I'm not angry, but I don't trust the way I used to." Silence. "I understand," Ryan said. "And I think that's fair." When the call ended, I set my phone down and realized this was the first time my son didn't demand comfort from me, and that was the first real sign of maturity. One evening, I pulled out an old photo album, pictures of me and my husband when we were young. The years we built everything from nothing. Photos of Ryan as a child, smiling freely, believing the world would always be safe. And I realized I had made a painful mistake as a mother. I tried to keep the world safe for my son, instead of teaching him how to stand when the world wasn't safe. And the price of that mistake came late, but it couldn't be avoided. I'm not proud that I won, because in this story, no one truly won. Ryan lost his illusion of himself. Maddie lost a marriage she entered with a false belief. The Hale family lost their familiar shield of power. And me? I lost the illusion that love alone could fix everything. But in return, I gained something more valuable. Awakening. I understand now. Love is not the same as unconditional self-sacrifice. And I realized I had made a painful mistake as a mother. I tried to keep the world safe for my son, instead of teaching him how to stand when the world wasn't safe. And the price of that mistake came late, but it couldn't be avoided. I'm not proud that I won, because in this story, no one truly won. Ryan lost his illusion of himself. Maddie lost a marriage she entered with a false belief. The Hale family lost their familiar shield of power. And me? I lost the illusion that love alone could fix everything. But in return, I gained something more valuable. Awakening. I understand now. Love is not the same as unconditional self-sacrifice. 6 days ago, I was called a dog at my own son's wedding. Today, I no longer need to prove who I am, because I learned the most important lesson of my life. A woman's worth isn't measured by how much she can endure, but by knowing when to stop. If this story has touched your heart, please remember, you are not alone. Share what you're feeling, and tell me where you're listening from. Comment your city or country. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie, so you don't miss the next real-life family revenge stories where every tear carries a lesson about trust, betrayal, and awakening.